Nathaniel Nearest Green was a slave who was forced to work for a man named Dan Call, a preacher, grocer, and distiller. Dan Call had Nearest manage the whiskey production, hidden away from his other more upstanding enterprises. But to understand the origin of Jack Daniel's whiskey and its relationship to Nearest Green, I need to travel deep to the hills of Lincoln County, where the origins of this story take root. I'm here at the Jack Daniel's Distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, to chat with resident historian Nelson Eddy. So this is the old office.
The old office. This building is original from Jack's day. It's the only building on the property that Mr. Jack would be familiar with.
Is this the man himself?
This is the man himself. I will tell you, he did wear a hat. Sometimes it was white, sometimes it was black. But that one, I think back in the 60s, they may have airbrushed that in. Because they weren't especially proud of Jack's bald head. Nowadays, we're not concerned with that sort of thing. We have the original photograph, and he's not wearing a hat in that one.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Vanity.
Yeah, well, even then, you couldn't trust photographs because, you know, it could be Photoshopped or back then airbrushed.
So what else do I need to see in here?
Yeah, there's an important find in this other room I think you should see.
I cannot wait.
Well, this is a very important photograph. Here's Mr. Jack Daniels. This is his crew. Jack right there with the white hat and the string tie there. The photograph was probably from the turn of the century, 1900s. It was in the family, the Daniel family's possession, and there was something striking about this photograph that let us know something's going on here, because an African American would not have been seated next to the owner of the company. At that time period, it wouldn't have been done. He probably would have been standing back with this gentleman. So we were always wondering, who is that man in the photograph that Jack apparently has some kind of a relationship with? Well, today we all know his name is George Green, one of Nearest's two sons.
Although this is a photo of George Green, one of Nearest's two sons, there is no known photograph of Nearest himself.
The story of Nearest Green has been around. He was born in about 1820, was born in Maryland. He comes to the Dan Call farm, enslaved at that time. And then the story goes back to Jack Daniels. His mother dies shortly after his childbirth. Jack's father will die during the Civil War, so Jack is really an orphan. He'll go to live and work on the Dan Call farm, and that's where Nearest met Jack. So Jack is slopping the pigs, he's helping on the farm, but eventually he knows the distillery, and he'll come to work at the still house alongside Nearest, who is the real day-by-day maker of the whiskey, and that's where Jack learns to make whiskey. But it didn't really come to light until we released a story about Jack Daniels learning to make whiskey from Nearest Green.
Now, this story has been common knowledge in the small town of Lynchburg, Tennessee for generations. But like most people, I first learned of the revised origin story of Jack Daniels when a 2016 New York Times article was released to commemorate the whiskey brand's 150th anniversary. This was the first mention of a man named Nearest Green.
I don't think we ever really appreciated the real meaning and importance of the story until we had somebody with outside eyes looking at it. She did the research, she had archivists, genealogists, and then she was kind enough to share that information with us. I remember her meeting with the president of the Jack Daniel's Distillery after this information, and the first words out of his mouth to her was, "How do we make it right?" And that was Fawn Weaver.
This is Fawn Weaver. She read the New York Times article just like I did and took it upon herself to investigate the story further. After years of research, she pushed the largest whiskey manufacturer in the world to formally recognize Nearest as Jack Daniel's first master distiller. She agreed to meet me at the historic farm of Reverend Dan Call. Remember him? The preacher who made Nearest teach Jack to distill whiskey? I'll be chatting about the spirits, among the spirits, at the home where the story literally began. Oh my gosh, look at this space.
We are in The home that Dan Call built. This is the house.
This is the house.
Yeah, this is it. So you're on the 313-acre property that about 25 minutes this way, you're going to have the distillery that Nearest Green was a distiller and he managed. The church didn't want him distilling. Temperance movement is coming through here. So he just kind of pretended that that didn't exist, but obviously it did.
So Jack Daniels comes here as a 7-year-old boy to be a chore boy, which is not a term I'd heard before.
When we look at it now, you're like, there's no way a 7-year-old is working in this day and age. But then the 7-year-old chore boy at that time, we're milking the cows, you're going and you're feeding the pigs, you're getting slop. Like, this is not a glamorous job. People like to look at him in the top hat or, you know, all these pictures and think, oh no, this is a privileged white guy. When he meets Nearest Green, he's only 8 years old. And when he's introduced to Nearest, he's introduced by Dan Call, and Dan Call says to Jack, this is Uncle Nearest. He's the best whiskey maker I know of. But the reason why it's an important statement is there were 16 other distilleries in a 4-mile radius. So the question was, what made Nearest Green's whiskey better than all the rest of theirs? There was a process, taking a traditional bourbon distillate and filtering it very slowly through sugar maple charcoal. You're pulling out impurities, but you're not adding anything. It's the process that Nearest Green then taught Jack Daniel.
Filtering your water through charcoal may be all the rage with hipsters these days, but West Africans used charcoal filtration to purify and preserve long before Americans did. The ingredient that made this uniquely Tennessee whiskey, the ingredient that is arguably Nearest Green's largest contribution to Tennessee whiskey, is filtering it through sugar maple charcoal made from the sugar maple tree, a tree that is indigenous to Lincoln County. The process has been dubbed the Lincoln County process ever since. I wonder if we can get that renamed.